minutes past 8.
Well, we're all victims of crime. We're all victims of crime. If we continue the bankrupt response of just paying young Polynesian, young Maori men in South Auckland, the dole, to sit in front of TV, smoke marijuana, watch pornography and plan more drug offending and more burglaries, then we're going to have them coming through our window regardless if we live in Epsom or anywhere else in the Greater Auckland. We have to deal with the root cause of law and order.
Of course, because that makes so much sense, right? Of course, that can only be John Banks, who in the past week or so has got some many wins against the national government. Or is it against the national government? Well, we'll find out now with Selwyn Manning. Thanks very much to livenews.co.nz. Welcome back, Selwyn.
Yeah, good morning, Glenn. Yes, thanks for that, Glenn.
Yeah, because it's What's that?
Sorry to the listeners for having to infect them with that kind of diatribe from John Banks so early in the morning, but there is a point to this.
It was interesting. It was interesting though that he was saying he wanted to get to the root cause of law and order. Well, wouldn't that be the police?
Yeah, you'd imagine, from the old police minister from the 1990s. Yeah, he used to carry around photographs of murder scenes in his suit jacket pocket and show anyone who wanted to have a look.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly that. I thought, too, a little bit of humble pie. I mean, I think the last time we talked about John Banks on your show was immediately prior to the election, Glenn, and I predicted that this guy was dog-tucker. There was no way a reasonably minded New Zealander would go and vote for him. But I guess there's a few people over in Epsom, and I know one in particular that after voted had to hold their nose and actually felt so sick, went home and had a shower. So There you go. We've got this man back in Parliament. But most significantly, what we can see is that this man, who is now John Banks, who is now the leader of the ACT Party and their only MP, the party's only MP in Parliament, is now being used by the national-led government and certainly by the Prime Minister John Key in a very, very, very significant way. And as we would have heard probably on the mainstream news this week, that John Banks is now positioned to pick up significant ministerial portfolios, but most significant amongst these, really watch this, is the regulatory reform, which is one that transcends, if you like, many, many other portfolios. And I would argue that we need to watch very specifically the influence of John Banks and those ideologues that are developing their power within this new government and how they're going to express that newfound power on social policy platforms.
So how are we meant to read this? I mean, is this act getting policy gains against the national government, or is it the opposite? The national government now has an excuse because they have this one ACT person, and to say, it's because of MMP that now we have to do all this other stuff.
Yeah, well, that's what the Prime Minister is kind of saying, this is MMP, this is what happens under MMP, but he's just being snide. He didn't want MMP to win the vote, obviously. He preferred supplementary member. But really now, what we are seeing is what has been going on all of 2011, that the National Party now has complete control over ACT. It's now a satellite party for the National Party. ACT is now the vehicle that National can inject extreme policies into. Policies that contain quite easily within ACT, but if they were developed in caucus, in the National Party caucus, and certainly amongst its members, then one could see that the division and derision could come from that, certainly amongst the more centrist and moderate factions within the National Party. So ACT now you've got to think of it like a satellite party of the National Party. You've got to see it as if it is now the National Party is in total control of this party, and it certainly is. I mean, you've got to say that the ACT Party, which once contained individuals who really spoke strong messages about fiscal prudence from the point of view of making sure taxpayers' money was used most effectively, is now occupied by the more radical centrist type of National Party ideologue that we saw in the 1990s. The differences from the 1990s to now is that those ideologues have learnt what is palatable within the New Zealand electorate and what isn't, and they've become much more shrewd. And if we do a little quick comparison, the comparison is that in the 1990s, the ideology was to privatise or to sell off in major ways complete assets, and in the core health services areas, for example, to commercialise the model and to put that model into a context where the user pays. Also, they were not into building facilities. As we used to hear as journalists in the 1990s, the government would say, we're not into bricks and mortar. Now, that is completely different if you compare to now. This new neoliberal ideology that we are seeing now being trotted out very strongly, it is into bricks and mortar. It knows the public likes to see assets on its books, so it keeps those assets. It develops those assets like schools, like hospitals, but it's setting it up so that then the private providers can come in. So your enterprise, your businesses will come in and operate these facilities that are owned by the state. And this is a new version of neoliberal public-private partnerships, that PPP thing we hear a lot about, but usually in the infrastructure area. With this lot, they're setting it up, and you don't have to gaze down a crystal ball to see this because it's already in train with the charter schools program. They're ready to do this and to roll it out, so it's perfectly set up for people like John Banks.
It almost seems like franchise contracts. It
is, yeah. So yeah, exactly. This is the Act kind of perfected this kind of, the implementation of the ideas and the ideology was phase one. The second phase was actually getting it to actually work in practice, to apply it. We saw this in local government. We saw it in the Papakura district, just south of Auckland, for example, where in the 1990s, all the water services were not just commercialised like we saw in other parts of the Greater Auckland region, but down in Papakura, in that district, those were more leaning toward an ACT type of ideology. They franchised out the running of those water services to an overseas company, United Water. United Water didn't own any of the infrastructure. It didn't own any of the plant. It purely and simply came in on representing its shareholders, said, we're in the business of providing water, and it set up shop, and a franchise was signed up for 20 years, and then it was extended again once that 20, expected that once the 20 years is up, it will be extended again in some way or form. But that's what we're seeing. That was at local government level. Now, what we're seeing is that ideology has existed inside the National Party and some of its factions for a long time, and they've sat very quiet in the last 3 years. Now we're seeing them coming to the fore, and then that's the same kind of model. You see, owning the infrastructure, owning the facility remains in the hands of public, but it rolls out to the service into the private sector. And in simple terms, what it means is New Zealanders will then have to be considered when they're going perhaps into the school environment, the charter school environment, but certainly when National rolls this into the health sector, that New Zealanders will become, once again, consumers, the clients, as opposed to, it's a different kind of relationship. Their relationship with the service provider, being, that's the company, is one where, it's on a business kind of term. And I would argue in a piece that will be attached to this video, that what that does is it severs that connection between the government and actual New Zealanders, in the sense of the government having a responsibility in the core service provision area to the New Zealander.
Yeah.
And that's broken. The responsibility is then between the government and the business to provide that service. And the New Zealander attaches to that business.
Does it also forget about actual, problems that occur over the next 3 years, real world problems that that the government might encounter, and it ignores some of those and instead goes down sort of a tunnel vision ideology kind of way where, no, this is the track, this is the plan that we're on, we can't deviate from it?
Yeah, exactly. What the problem is very simply that with an ideology, all ideologies, irrespective of whether they're left or right, they are centralised in the sense of that's where the ideology is stamped. The policy, the grander policy is stamped down there. The problem with the government that sticks purely and simply to ideology and does not connect itself into the regions and into the areas of need, like with the public, is that there is that disconnect. It does not know, in a sense, the problems that are happening. If for example, the situation, in the health area, for example, say there are real demands, real problems developing in particular areas, and say, once again, look in the Auckland region. Now, the government, in a pure sense, would be able to have a policy that would ideas would feed back from that community back to the government, where it develops the policies to address this, or regulates, or whatever, or ensures that its public servants meet that need. Now, with this kind of thing, the responsibility is only between the business contract and the government. In a sense, it'll be drawn up in a way that is supposed to meet at the front end of that the needs of the community. But when those needs change, well then, how is that government actually going to know that? The other thing is that at the moment, if a person, for example, thinks to themselves, this is unacceptable, the way I was not going to, my loved one or my parents were not getting treated properly in this public hospital, or my children are really not getting, the right kind of education in this school. Arguably, and many people do this, they'll go to their local MP, they'll have a meeting with that local MP and say, this just isn't working here. And there is a connection to it politicises the thing, in the sense that beneficial outcomes can come from that. With this type of arrangement that is developing very fast since the election here in New Zealand, that person, that New Zealander, you or I, who's dissatisfied perhaps that the health system or the education system is not meeting our needs, well, they've got to get into a situation with that business to address that.
Right.
And if things go wrong, well, what recourse do you have? You go to the courts, and we all know who can afford to take on a big player in the courts these days. No one really can.
Yeah. All right. Well, you can find this as a video once more, and also an article roundup over at livenews.co.nz and up at scoop.co.nz as well. Thanks very much, Selwyn.
Okay, Glenn. Thank you.
Selwyn Manning.